Maria, you want to go to the No, she's going to stay here.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'd like to greet you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Good morning.
Welcome you to the house of the Lord this morning. It's good to be here. It's good to be able to be with my brothers and sisters here in San Antonio. And my brother Mario, he always calls me a visitor, but I feel like I've been coming here long enough to, I'm just here now, I don't know if I'm a visitor anymore. I've only been coming here since for the past 30 years, so. Alright, appreciate that, Mary. Appreciate that. I mean, 23 years. But it's good to be here with my brothers and sisters, to be able to study with you all, to worship, to learn. And as we go into our Sabbath school lesson for today, for April the 8th, the title of our Sabbath school lesson is Abram and Lot. The scripture reading is found in Genesis chapter 11. It's verses 10 through 11 and 24 through 30. If I can get one of my brothers and sisters to read the scripture reading for me. Thank you, sister. So we see in our scripture reading basically the bloodline of Abram and Lot. So we know it starts off with 10 and 11, as our sister read, of the generations of Shem, which we know who Shem was one of the ones that was saved. As we studied last week, we studied, of course, in the beginning, but part of that was Noah and his sons that lived. His sons and their wives. So we see where it started from, the generations of Shem, right? One of the only survivors during the flood. It says that he was 100 years whenever he begat. I'm going to do my best to try and pronounce some of these names, but they're tongue twisters. For Arphax, 2 years after the flood, Shem lived. He begat Arphax 500 years and begat sons and daughters. So he was 100 years old when he had his first kid. When he had his kid, and then after he had the kid, he lived another 500 years and begat sons and daughters. So, repopulation of the earth, right? Repopulation of the earth at this time, seeing as these were like the last, they was the only survivors of the flood. So then it comes. If you continue to read like all the way down from like to verse 26, it talks about there's a lot more as far as like the lineage of Shem and where it came from. So we pick up on verse 24, which kind of goes into where Abram came from, right? So it says that Nahor was started, and he begat Terah. And after he had Terah, his son, he said he lived 119 years, and then he begot, of course, more sons and daughters. Terah lived 70 years, and he's the one who had 3 more. So Terah had Abram, he had Nahor, and he had Haran. So it doesn't really discuss the descendants of Nahor so much. It was more of who we're studying about today, right? So it says these are the generations of Terah, who we were just talking about. So out of Terah came Abram, Nahor, and Haran. But then it specifies at the end of 27 that Haran begat Lot, which is part of our Sabbath school lesson today, who we're studying, Abram and Lot. Because it says Haran died before his father in the land of his nativity, in the Ur of the Chaldees. So don't really hear too much about Haran other than where he came from and that he died. Before he died, he had his son, which is Lot. So based off of what we just read in 27, that Terah was the father of Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Obviously, these 3 are brothers, but it specifies that Haran, his son, was Lot, which makes Abram Lot's uncle. So it's pretty specific as to the genealogy here of where these men came from. And then it talks about the wives that they took. Abram and Nahor took their wives. Specifies who Nahor's was with Milcah. Abram's is Sarai. And then it ends at verse 30, what Sarai was barren, but she had no child. So kind of straightforward when it comes to the scripture reading as far as where these men came from and the line that they came from. But we know that they're descendants of Shem, again, which is one of the only survivors, son of Noah. So pretty straightforward. Kind of setting up a prelude to what the Sabbath school lesson is going to be about, where they came from, as we kind of delve into their lives, as we kind of delve into where they're going to go, the paths that they take, the different things that they had to go through. But if any of my brothers and sisters had anything in the Sabbath school lesson, any commentary or something different that they saw, I'll give you a second to pass forward with that commentary.
I was taken by the ages of the men when they
Oh,
were
yeah.
children.
Oh, yeah.
Because I guess we were going to talk about Abraham, but Abraham's father was 70. He was down the list. He was 70 years old when he begat. They put all 3 children together, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go back to Shem's children. Shem was 102 years old when he begat his first child. Whether that had something to do with the flood,
Mm-hmm.
he was older. The next one was 35, and then 30, 34, 30, 32. And the youngest, Nahor, was 29. There's a couple other 30s.
Yeah.
But Nahor was 29, so he was the youngest. That's more like our generations nowadays. But before then, they were 102.
Oh, yeah.
Their first
Oh,
child.
yeah.
They also lived a lot longer.
Yeah, yeah.
They can open their parents a lot longer.
You can see the life expectancy back then was far beyond what we can even imagine nowadays, right? It was and then they were not just living long, but they were popping out kids at these old ages too. So it kind of makes you put you in awe, right, of the physical state of what a man was and his, when he was close to 100 as opposed to 900.
Abraham's father was 70. When he had his first one, Abraham having Isaac when he was 100 isn't so, it's old past the time
Mm-hmm.
for women more than men. But even men nowadays, I don't know if the men are fertile anymore after they be 100 to have kids. Anyway, it just hit me when I read all the ages, trying to think it through.
Yeah, it's very very rare nowadays to see at least a man be able to have a child so late in the game, right? They usually around 40, 45 they start capping you off, I don't know, you're probably the problem now. And but back then, it was 100 years old, okay, let's have another kid type thing. It again, it makes me think of the state of man, as a human being, the physical capabilities of men back then that were living to 900 years old, as opposed to now where even living to 100 almost seems far-fetched at this point.
When I had my last child, though, they were so worried, the doctors were, that we would have a Down syndrome child, because the odds as you age of having
Yeah, it does.
Nowadays, are too
It
young.
does.
But I think we put that limit on ourselves. I mean, God will, if God allows you to have a child at that old age, then it's a blessing because it's possible with Him. And we always think, oh, well, that's not possible. And we put all these limitations on ourselves, but with God, He's like, there's no limitations with Him.
Yep.
Looking at this verses, I'm very amazed about verse 31 and how they traveled from Ur to
Canaan.
Haran, and then they went from there all the way to
Canaan.
Canaan, yeah. And that was without vehicles or bicycles or cars, they just travel by camel or walk, and
Mm-hmm.
you just gotta imagine how they travel and having all this cattle and other stock that they had, and they moved along, and they moved along, and they moved along, and they stayed there at a Haran for a while, and then they went all the way south to Egypt.
Yeah, it was. There were nomads. Moving around, and it makes you think as well. At this time, this is after the years after the flood, but nevertheless, it's still kind of early in when it comes to humanity, right? Because they basically had to start over from square one, and of course, Noah and his sons. I'm sure they had some knowledge, but technology couldn't have been as probably what it advanced as what it was, later in the Old Testament. So this was from square one, where a lot of these things were starting over.
And sometimes we just think as an adult view of it, but you have to remember you had the old people, you had the children, you had the women, you had pregnant women with you moving in that travel. So it was a very organized way of them being able to travel. And then right there in Aram, their father died at 205 years old.
Yeah. It was a coordinated effort, to say the least, to have all these people move. So we'll go on to our golden text, brothers and sisters. Our golden text is found in Galatians chapter 3, verse 7. If somebody would like to read or recite that, you may do so at this time.
And he knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons.
Galatians 3:7.
Oh, ready? Joseph.
It's Genesis.
Know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham.
Thank you, Sister Miriam. At least we know Adam and Eve were clothed at that time too. So as we read the scripture reading, far jump from Genesis to Galatians, Old to New Testament. But it talks about those that are of the faith are the same are the children of Abraham. As we're studying today, Abram and Lot. As we know, Abram later became Abraham, as we'll study later on. But Abraham, being one of his most famous titles, is the father of faith, right? Being the father of faith that he was. We'll delve into that as we study the lesson. We discover why Abraham was the father of faith. But those that are of that same faith, the same faith that Abraham had in God, it says that we are the children of Abraham in a sense. Not necessarily by bloodline or anything, but it's by the Spirit. It's by being grafted into this family of God. So it's a beautiful thing to read here, a short verse, but nevertheless something that when we think about it, when we analyze, comparing our faith to Abraham's as children of God, do we have that faith? Do we have that same faith that he had to follow? Again, as we'll study throughout this Sabbath school lesson. So we'll go ahead and get started with our questions, brothers and sisters. We'll go on to question number 1.
Did God make promises to Abraham? Genesis 12:1-3. Now the Lord God had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I'll make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed.
Already did. He told him, what was that first thing? So, Jeff, if somebody told you right now, hey, I need you to, everything you got going on, just drop it, because I need you to move over here. Right now, wouldn't you just kind of be like, oh, no.
What's in it for me?
What did he say? What was that, Brother Jerry?
I said, you mean like if he told you to move from Dallas to San Antonio?
Or vice versa. It's hard, right? Speaking from experience. I see Cindy giving a nod of approval because Brother Jerry got his in on that one. So,
From California to San Antonio.
or from the Panhandle to San Antonio. It's a rough call, isn't it? Like, it's a rough call to be like, just go. I need you. Just get out of here. I have something better for you. And what he told him straight up, he said, I'm going to make you a great nation. And I don't know about anybody else, if the Lord told me I'm going to make a great nation out of you, it'd kind of scare you a little bit, right? Like, whoa, like me? Like, who am I? Like, well, who am I to have this? Who am I to be so blessed to be able to be called a great nation? But this is God. This is God talking to Abraham, making those promises, as our brother confirmed, telling him he's going to bless him, make his name great, which is proof because the scripture, the golden text we just read, way after the time of Abraham, using him as a reference when it comes to faith, tells them he's going to bless them, and anybody that comes against them, he's going to curse them. And in thee, all families of this earth be blessed. All families of this earth, not just at that time, families to come. So great promises that God makes to Abram here. But again, analyzing from the human perspective, it's got to be hard to hear these things, right? Because of course the Bible tells us it describes all of these things, but what the Bible doesn't do sometimes is give us human perspective of what they felt at that moment when you hear those things, and it's, you got to put yourself in their shoes, and it's hard to because of where we are now as opposed to where humanity was at that time.
Speaking of that too, he still lives with his dad. He's 75 years old. I think it's time to fly to Cooper a little bit there.
Well, 75 back then was like 17, 18 years old. So if they're living at 800, 900 years old. Yeah, true. It again, because of where we've progressed as far as like humans, right? It sounds like, dude, you're 75 at home. You're like, you're living with your pops still. Like, yo, what's going on? Still driving his horse, girl. Not his car. He ain't even got his own saddle yet. It was a great promise, though, that God gave to Abram. And I keep having to catch myself because I want to say Abraham, but it's Abram right now. It's Abram. Okay, we'll go on to question number 2.
Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot's brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. Into the land of Canaan, Abram took his wife and his nephew, his brother's son, and everything they had.
Yep.
Everything they all, even the servants.
Mm-hmm. Took his nephew, took his wife, everything that they had, which is where all the substance that they had gathered, and on top of that, the souls that they had gotten in Haran. Of course, it could have been servants. It could have been just, friends, people that they met. But it's interesting how it says, like, the word souls, right? To me, I found that interesting when I read that, like the souls of they that had gotten in Haran. And it could be, just another word for saying their lives or their people or different individuals. But I see it as, like, their souls of Abram had to have, at this point, of course, he had faith. He was following the Lord. So if it was to me, when I read souls, it's like it couldn't have been just Abram, right? Those that were with him, those that were in his surroundings, those that were with his family, had to believe the same thing as well, right? They had to have had, because it didn't say Abram left with his father or these others that were with him. It says he was with Lot and his wife and those that he had brought with him, those souls again. So I see it as those that believed in the same thing that Abram did, the same faith that he had to be able to leave his home. They had to believe just as much as Abram did because he's leaving, right? Like, he's leaving his safety net. He's leaving where he was at to go wherever the Lord told him to go, which at this point it told him he was going to Canaan.
They're with his caretakers for his animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like a little, like, twist on words, because that was, I will bless you, those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. So everybody that he's got with him is all blessing him.
Mm-hmm.
They were not considered, like, they were the beginning of all that was saved.
Mm-hmm. All that was to come out of his seed was it's nowadays, again, you keep comparing it. You compare it to modern day as far as the substance of a man and a woman that they have, right? Pack up your stuff and go. Take everybody with you. You really just have the husband, the wife, and their kids if they have any. And Abram had his wife Sarai, but and then he had his nephew, but there were others that were with it. So it's got to take a lot of trust, and of course the word faith just keeps coming back into it, to be able to follow this man if they didn't have any type of blood ties with them or anything.
Some of these souls had to be his soldiers or bodyguards or somebody skilled in fighting, because other chapters it says Abram, when he went to retrieve Lot,
Mm-hmm.
he had his family, his servants, whatever,
Yeah.
his army. He had built everything you needed to sustain somebody who had wealth. He probably had someone to protect him.
Oh, yeah.
Such a wealthy man.
Yeah.
Which is another question later.
Yeah. Nah, you're good, Sister Gina. You're good.
Sorry.
No, you're okay.
But that was souls, what I thought of souls.
Yeah.
They each had maidservants, and Hannah had, or Sarah had
Mm-hmm.
her maidservant.
He had him a little group, to say the least, though. He wasn't leaving just him and Sarai and saying, all right, let's go. He had him a little something when he was leaving.
And going back to the previous question about the faith of Abraham, you have to remember what lands he was in and what land he traveled through. I mean, this land was the land of the Chaldeans, I think.
Chaldees.
Yeah, and it was a huge area at that time.
Mm-hmm.
A huge land that they controlled,
Yep.
and they lived in it, and they had to be careful of all the cultures and their gods and all the customs that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Now they go to Haran, and Haran, as I was studying this, it's a commercial central that they have commercial business, and it was booming at that time, and they would come from the Mediterranean and they would travel to that city, and sometimes they would go back, or sometimes they would go back and use the Euphrates River to do their business down the river. And again, they had all kinds of customs and culture there, and gods, and then they go back south to the Canadian land,
Mm-hmm.
and it was huge at that time as well, and they had to travel through all those cities and then go all the way down to keep themselves faithful, and through all that, and Abraham, of course, they would teach his children, because God, told Abraham to teach the children, and he did. So you can imagine the trials that they went through, trying to keep themselves from getting entangled into those customs and cultures and gods.
Yeah. Said it was about a 450-mile journey for them. And from here to Dallas is like, what, 270, almost 300 miles. And that's about a 4.5-hour drive. So imagine walking 450 miles. That wasn't no easy trek, not just with that, but they had substance. They had cattle, they had all these different people. They probably had their belongings, so it probably took a while to get there. But they don't really talk too much about the journey. So you have to kind of put yourself in that perspective. To, like our brother said, going through these different cities and towns, and probably different things where people had other gods. But again, leaving their home, leaving their safety net of where they were at.
It's an even bigger one then, right? I mean, it's the risk that Abram is going to take on, the risk that he's going to take on of uprooting everything, his people, his substance, and go out in this area that's unsecure, right? Where he is, he knows the lay of the land, he knows how he's got everything set up, he knows who's to his left, who's to the east, who's to the west, he knows, he's got his security detail and everything. But now he's going to go out in the unknown, right? Where, for us to move, from California to San Antonio is, it's a big deal, but you're not automatically exposing yourself to all this risk, right? This risk of bandits, this risk of, you're going to be a target, right? You've got substance, you've got wealth, and people are going to be looking for a piece of the action, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a huge thing at that day and time, just because the land was, uncontrolled.
Yeah.
The peoples were uncontrolled, and it was, get what you can and take what you can, and it's a huge thing. What God is asking you to do.
Because back then, power came from what you had, your substance. So the more you had, the more powerful people viewed you. But it comes down to what? It comes down to that F word. It comes down to faith, right? Substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. The Lord promised Abram something. He couldn't see it, but he hoped for it because he trusted the Lord, and he left.
I think one of the hardships that they would have was that place is barren. Like, to feed their cattle and things as they went along, it wasn't like, well, let's just let them graze right here. They would have to bring a lot of stuff with them to feed them.
So not only like distance, but also upkeep of like your livestock too.
It'd be difficult.
Not an easy ask. Not an easy ask. So we'll go on to question number 3.
After arriving in Canaan, what was said and what was done in Genesis 12, verses 7 and 8. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there buildeth he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence into a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he built an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. So God appeared and told him his descendants would own that land. He would give that land to his descendants. And each 2 places here, he built an altar at each place. So
Yep.
thank him, honor him. It says to call upon the Lord.
Yes, ma'am. So the Lord promised he would take care of Abram when he left. And when he did, whenever he got there, as our sister said, he built these 2 altars. He built these altars basically to thank the Lord, to honor the Lord for protecting them, right? It says he called upon the name of the Lord. Abram basically, I guess, identify himself now as like a true, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess a true, there you go, a true follower or member of the Lord, right? Of God's family. The Lord instructed Abram to do so, and he did. Not only did he obey those orders the Lord gave him, whenever he got there, he built this altar to basically saying, thank you, Lord, but also like a way of acceptance of I've done what you've told me to. So we see.
It doesn't say here, the verses, what Abraham's daughter prayed and put the altars up. He had no descendants at that time.
No.
God tells him, I'm going to give all this land to your descendants. He doesn't have it.
Yeah. It's got to play with his mind a little bit, right? You know, Abram.
It's the beginning of faith.
It's got to be as Abram being, he keeps hearing, I'm going to give this to you and your descendants, and yet he's got no kid. Got to make him feel a little like, okay, but nevertheless, he still built these altars. He still honored the Lord. But again, putting yourself in that place of, all right, it's more of a feeling of hope. Like if the Lord promised me my descendants are gonna have this, then they will. Yeah, okay, I may not have kids now, but I have to feel good about it if the Lord promised it to me, right?
At this time, does he already have Ishmael?
No, not yet. So we'll go on to question number 4.
After coming up out of Egypt, how is Abram's substance described? Genesis 13:1-2. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, and silver, and in gold. He had a lot of wealth.
Yes, sir. Abram, he had a little chunk of change on him, didn't he? He was rich in cattle, silver, and gold, and we just made the comment that substance meant power at this time. And Abram, he had a lot of power based off of what he owned, but they were coming out of Egypt, and the whole reason that they were in Egypt, so let's backtrack a little bit before they came to Egypt, is of course they were in the land of Canaan. There was a famine. And so this famine, Abram went to Egypt. They traveled to Egypt where, they could survive. And Abram's mind, you got to be, the Lord told me to come here, and all of a sudden it's barren. Now, we can't eat. There's a famine in this land. So now we got to leave the land that we're in. So go to Egypt. That's where the whole story comes of everybody had, the eyes for Sarai at that time, but Abram was scared because he was in a foreign land. He was scared that they were going to kill him if they found out that was his wife, so he said it was his sister. Then Pharaoh was all into her, and then it became Egypt started getting beaten down a little bit, like bad things were happening to Egypt. And Pharaoh brought forth Abram and asked him what's going on, and Abram reveals the truth. She's actually my wife. Pharaoh gets all mad. He's like, why didn't you tell me that to begin with? You brought this, these plagues upon our land, so go. And then Pharaoh sent Abram away, sent Abram and Sarai and all that they had basically away from them, which leads up until we get into verse 13, where we pick up.
Maybe some of the people that are part of with them are like, is this really a good decision? Was this a good decision that we made here, Abram? I mean, we left where we were secure, we left where everything was good, and now we're here and there's this famine, and we got to keep going. We're not going to be able to support the livestock. We're not going to be able to feed ourselves. Maybe we were better off
Where we were.
staying home.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just had faith in Abram. He had been so prosperous. Whatever he did, they could see God prosper him. So maybe they just had faith in Abram that he would do something that was foolish.
Abram was rich because God blessed him.
Yeah.
And people can see that. And if you're good those who were good to Abraham, God would bless them. And if you were bad to Abraham, you were cursed.
Yeah.
So it's admirable. Wealth is not bad. Wealth is something God blesses you with,
Yeah.
and honors you. That's where Abram
Yeah.
has faith in the Lord.
I see a lot of parallels to to Joseph. I see a lot of parallels to Moses at this time, because when the story of Joseph, when there was a famine in the land, where did the people go? They went to the land of Egypt, right, to be saved. When plagues came upon Egypt, what happened? They kicked them out. They said, you got to go. And people of Israel left not just with what they had; they left with wealth. A lot of parallels to the stories that you read later on in the New Testament. But I see it from both sides. The people had to have trusted Abraham, being as they left their home to follow him, or Abram. I keep saying Abraham, to Abram to follow him. And I also see the side that Brother Tim brought up, being a human being. When you're in a safety net, and all of a sudden we're gonna die because there's famine in the land. I can see it from that side too. Like, we were good where we were at, so it's gotta. I see it from both sides of having faith in Abram, more importantly having faith in God, but also to sometimes allowing that human aspect of us to take the precedence, and when you're hungry, or when you're like panicking, you kind of start like, oh, why did I do this? Why did I do this? Why did I do this? So I can see it from both sides, but nevertheless, they were taken care of. Outside of Abram's deception, right? They were taken care of when they left, and it says that he was rich, as our brother Jeff said, he was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold. So he left Egypt probably with more substance than what he came.
Being faithful and being obedient doesn't mean that it makes everything easy.
Right. Go on to question number 5.
Did Lot have flocks and herds as well? Genesis 13:5. Lot also, which went with Egypt, had flocks and herds in CSB.
Yes, ma'am. So Abram had his, and Lot, of course, which is the nephew of Abram, had his own too. He had his own flocks, his own herds, his own tents, basically his own set of people that were with him as well. So a lot of wealth going around in what it seems like here. Abram having what he had, Lot having what he had. And we'll go on into the next question, though, because it kind of ties in with the one that we just read. So we'll go on to question number 6.
What happened? Genesis 13:6-7. And the land was not able to bear them that began to dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the
Parasite.
dwelt in the land.
So what happened here?
Was there enough food to go around? Cows eat it all.
I see a problem between two rich men, right? Kind of seems like nowadays it's like first world problems. Both of them had too much to the point where it became a problem, to where they were, it says the land was not able to bear them that they might dwell together. Basically, not necessarily that there wasn't enough, room or anything, but at this time, these were the basically like dry months or whatever, and the air was already thin as it was. So being the dry months in the summertime, air was probably even more scarce. It sounds far-fetched, but it is, especially being in the land that they were in. So all of these people, you ever been in a crowded room, and sometimes it makes it a little hard to breathe just because, there's so many people around. It's too overpopulated, and you're just like, I need to get out of here. I need to go. I need to get some fresh air. Because you're around, it's so much. Like, it's like taking up so much, not just as far as like your personal space, but it takes up like even like the air that you breathe. There was too many people, not just people, but their flocks, everything that they owned. The cattle. You got to think of sheep. You got to think of cows. You got to think of any type of livestock that they had at this time, and it was just too much. And then we go to verse 7, which is basically the inevitability of what was going to happen. It says there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's and Lot's cattlemen, and it was going to happen, right? It was going to happen because there's so much. You got these cattle grazing over here, and then maybe over here on Lot's side there's not enough, so they have to bring it over here. But then that starts beef between them because it's like, no, I'm feeding mine, and again, it's a problem between two rich nations at this time, or two rich men at this time, and on top of that.
It's kind of interesting how they are even trying to be two separate
Nation.
anyway, because if you know cattle, they don't know the difference, and if they're Abrams or Lots, they're all just like herding together and being together. They see those over there, they're going to want to be over there because they're over there and they might be doing something they need to be doing. So like the mentality of cattle just seems kind of ridiculous that they were trying to keep them separate anyway,
Yeah.
without fences or, I mean, obviously they were too close together to keep them apart, and maybe that was a part of the problem, was that because they were so large that they had merged together, and then trying to keep them separate was a strife. And I know it says between the herdsmen, but part of that strife is because they can't control cattle.
Yeah. Too much.
Not only that, but there wasn't enough grazing land for the cattle, and that was the problem because they were fighting for the land that they wanted their cattle to graze. So Abraham pushed this way and they pushed this way, so it got to where they were striving against each other because of the land, and they couldn't graze their cattle. So that was mainly the problem that they were having, and that's why they were striving against each other. It created a big problem.
Also there, Brother Nate, we noticed that they had competition.
Oh yeah.
The Canaanites had cattle there.
Parasite.
Perizzites had cattle there.
Yes, sir.
So they weren't the only ones
Yeah.
taking that. And to kind of put this in perspective, they had large herds. We can tell that. Abraham had large herds. Lot had large herds. In our country, we've got pretty good grass. And it takes 30 acres to run a cow and calf year round. So you go to thinking of that country out there, very little grass. It's called the Negev, and that's all wide open spaces of very little vegetation. So think how much more land it took to run those cattle there than it would here even.
Yeah. That was anything with any type of vegetation. I was prime real estate at this time. But to your point, Brother Jerry, you beat me to it, was the competition they had, the Canaanite and the Perizzite that were there as well.
The Canaanite, the Perizzites, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"We've been here.
Yep.
You guys come into town taking everything over. We're here before you."
Yep.
Can you imagine they having cattle and camels and goats, and they having to feed all those in Abraham's stock, and then you have Lot as well. So that's stuff going on there.
Yeah. Again, drawing parallels to the story of when the people of Israel were told to, well, it starts off with Moses, but goes into Joshua, they had to come into the promised land. It wasn't just a matter of oh, we're coming in, like it's already set up, like one of them houses that you can buy that already comes like with, with all the furniture and stuff in it. It's like, no, you're coming in, I promise you this land, but you got to come in, and it's not empty, you got to establish yourself, but you're going to have enemies there. Same thing with Abram at this time. They came in, but they weren't there first, as Brother Tim said. They had people there that were like, I don't know about all that. Like he said, we were here first, and you just come in and establish what you want. Like they're not going to take too kindly about that. But so much, their substance was great that they couldn't dwell together. I just think of nowadays where people just have so much stuff that they have to. They don't even they can't get rid of it, that they buy a storage unit, or because they just always want something new. They have so much, to where it just becomes unbearable, to where, you got to start purging some of that stuff. But you can imagine how much stuff this time that they had, to where it became a burden to live with basically the people you've been traveling with the whole time.
And another thing I was thinking, when we were talking about the cattle, the camel, the goats and the donkeys and all that stuff, you have to remember that was their investment, and that was their income, and they had to make sure and they took care of it. It wasn't so much about Abraham and Lot. It was just the cattlemen that we have a responsibility. We gotta do what we gotta do to take care of the animals, and they were doing it.
Yep, that was there also the need of trade as well. So we'll go on to question number 7.
How did Abram propose to settle the matter? Reading 9. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife. I pray thee between you and me, between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart the right hand, then I will go to the left. So what did he propose? Let's separate. You go one way, I'll go, you pick, and I'll go the opposite way. Let's not fight about this. Let's not let our people fight about this.
He diffused a situation here, didn't he? Because they were ready to, they were probably at arms, imagine as angry as that they were, all this strife between the herdsmen, and, it obviously was more than one day, you got to believe that they were kind of over time, right? Like every other day, probably something boiling over to the point where it was like, all right, we're almost at our breaking point, to where we're going to start fighting our own people. And Abram diffusing, as our brother said, and said, we're going to separate. And whichever side you pick, I'll go the other way. But as long as we're not against each other, as long as we're not fighting, Abram being the voice of reason here, the voice of reason. Again, you see, what we're reading about this, the troubles that they've had, but again, not because of enemies, or not because of what they didn't have. It's because they were blessed so much. The Lord blessed them with so much that it became a problem. How many times do we see people that have so much that it pulls them away, or it deters them from what, the way they're supposed to be living, right? Because that gets in your head of, okay, I have this much now, but I need more, and then it pulls you away from we're actually supposed to be, the way we're supposed to be living. Instead of recognizing, God blessed me with this, I should be using this, of course, to sustain myself, but what can I do to bless others, or what can I do to better the church? So the blessings that the Abram and Lot were given, obviously it seems it was way more than could be handled, but nevertheless, Abraham not turning away, from the purpose that God had called him. Abram doing his best to keep everybody together, because they were family. These were brethren, whether it be by blood or whether it be because they've been traveling together. Because Lot's Abram's nephew, so some of these people were legitimate blood, but they had been together when they left the land. They had been together when they went to Egypt. They had, been together now that they're back in the land of Canaan. Abram didn't want any of these problems. They were family.
As a carnal mind, our human thinking is a little bit different than reality, right? The reality is that the relationship of problems to wealth is inverse of what we think. The more wealth you have, the more problems you have. The less wealth you have, the fewer problems you have, right? All the way down to, if you don't have food to eat today, you don't have food to eat tomorrow, you don't have food to eat next week, you have one problem, and that problem is you got to eat. Right? But when you have wealth, you have many problems.
Yeah.
And it's kind of counterintuitive to us. It's like, it's an inverse relationship. The more wealth that you have, the more problems you have. The less wealth that you have, the fewer problems you have. The magnitude of the problems may be different, but
Yeah.
it creates a problem, right? And here we see everyone being like, let's just settle this and do it that way. I'll go this way. You choose.
Yeah. More money, more problems. So we'll go on to question number 8.
What did Lot choose? Genesis 13:10-11. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered, everywhere like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east, and thus they separated from each other. So he went east.
Yes, he did. He chose the plain of Jordan as he looked up and he's looking at the plain of Jordan, which was well known for being well watered this time, because he deemed his cattle needed water more at this time than actual grazing, and he was interested in this plain of Jordan. So of course this was he chose this, so Abram was going to go the opposite direction, but Lot, seeing what was needed best for his flocks, for his people, and he chose this plain of Jordan. It says, but before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, we hadn't even, of course, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's interesting that we haven't even touched Sodom and Gomorrah yet, but it's already being kind of referenced here to what it was, as seen as the city that it was and the sin that was there. But it hadn't been destroyed yet. It referenced that here, that it hadn't been destroyed yet, giving a kind of an insight to what was going to happen to Lot, where his eyes were set. But it was a land that was full of water, but it was kind of like the word they use is kind of like it was lush, full of different greeneries, or just an ideal land for cattle, right? An ideal land to raise your herds. So
go back to what the area was, maybe it was 5 acres per head there versus
30.
the other direction it was 90 acres per head or something.
Yeah. Lot very strategic with the land that he chose, but nevertheless it diffused the situation and it prevented violence between these brethren here. Okay, we'll go on to question number 9.
Was the covenant confirmed? Genesis 15:1-10. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward." But Abram said, "Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" Then Abram said, "Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir." And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." Then he brought brought him outside and said, Look now towards heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So he said to him, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought all these to him and cut them in two down the middle and placed each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds in two. So Abram asked God for confirmation that he is going to keep this promise to multiply him and give him a son.
Yep. Says,
This was the way that a covenant or a contract, we might even call it, was done in that day and time, even between two people. It may not be 3 of these animals, but they may just take one heifer, we'll say, split it down the middle, put it on each side, and they both walk together through that. So they'd be touching the animals and the blood. So that made a blood contract for them. And that's the way many contracts were, so to speak, signed in that day and time, or guaranteed. So the Lord's saying to him, you know this customary way of having contracts sealed, and I'm going to seal it with you.
yep.
So then God comes and walks through the animals along with him to confirm or guarantee the covenant.
Yep. This was the only time too that you'll ever find where they used a heifer and a goat and a ram of 3 years old. Basically, it was like when these animals were like in the prime of their life, right, at their strongest. So this is really the only time that you read about them using these animals at 3 years old. You gotta, in verse 1, it's pretty it's pretty surreal, having a vision with God telling you, fear not, that I'm your shield and your exceeding great reward. It's gotta at least settle Abram's nerves a little bit, right? Imagine the Lord tells us that all the time when we read His Word. Are you, I am your shield, I am your, I'm your strength, and it should ease us, but sometimes it doesn't. But Abram seeing in a vision here, it had to bring him some comfort. But Abram, being human, in verse 2 and 3, talks about, you promised me this, Lord, you promised me this, but I don't have a child. I have no seed. I have nothing that's come out of me. You promised me this, that my name was gonna be not in a sense of like arrogance or in a sense of, I want my name to be great, but Lord, you promised me this, but I don't have a child. I don't have it. I don't have an heir. And the Lord, being who He is, reminded him of that in verses 4 through 6, telling him that out of your own, I will give you a son. I'll give you an heir. I didn't say son. He said, I promised you thine heir. He said, I'll give you an heir. And He told him to look at the sky. He told him to look at the heavens and said, the stars, if you're able to number them, but you can't. You look up in the sky, you can't sit there and count how many stars are above your head. He's like, your seed's going to be like this, as the number of the stars in the sky. And, of course, 6 is where Abram was reassured. It says he believed in Him, believed in the Lord, and counted it to him for righteousness. So Abram, being a little kind of frustrated, probably a little bit like, oh, you promised me this, but I don't have a kid. And then the Lord reassuring him, trust me, I'm going to take care of you. You will have this. And then, as our brother Jerry described, the covenant verse, or the ceremony that took place between verses 7 and 10, and the Lord being in the midst of them, reassuring him that it's going to happen. So it has to put Abram a little bit at ease at this time to what was promised to him. Having a nation or having people come, my descendants as the stars in the sky, as people, many as the sand of the sea. It's got to be very reassuring to him. But
we can see, of course, it's not like it's a complaint, sort of, in
Yeah.
a good way, because he hasn't seen anything. He's 75 years old, or maybe more now.
yeah,
When is it going to come? My old age. Where is it? God had to make his covenant with him, promise.
yeah,
But it was more of a complaint. I mean, we were too, waiting for, hey, I promise you this, and you're waiting and waiting. When is it coming? I don't have it. All his belongings and custom would have gone to his servant, Eliezer of Damascus, because he was like a senior servant. They would go to the senior servant, adopted house servant or house son.
yeah.
If they didn't have any children, they would go with him. That's what we're saying. He's the only one.
Yeah.
So, God always is faithful and had to show him.
The Lord is a perfect example of the Lord is not slack on his promises. The Lord is not slack on his promises. If he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And we, as individuals, have to believe that. As Abram, again, being the father of faith, trusted in the Lord, trusted that the Lord was going to do what he said he was going to do. We have to mirror that, brothers and sisters. If the Lord tells us he's going to do something for us, he's going to do it. Now, do we have visions? The Lord doesn't. The Lord has already said that he doesn't come that way anymore. He doesn't come in visions to us anymore. That was the way that the old times, and now he gives us this. He gives us this word to read what he has to say. This when we ask the Lord, talk to me. Us reading this word is the Lord talking to us. This is how he speaks to us, through his word. And he's telling us of the promises that he has for us if we trust in him. And we have to believe those trusts. So Abram has a vision here, and he sees it, and he trusts in the Lord, and it reassures him. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, we're too busy looking for signs. We're too busy looking for things that, that's definitely going to happen. Or I always give the comparison of the wind can blow one way for 1 second, and then it blows the other way for another second, and everybody's like, that's God talking to me. When he's been talking to us the whole time. We have to be careful with that, brothers and sisters. Not everything is the Lord. Sometimes it's just nature. Sometimes it's just the way that things happen. But
and sometimes, brother, we lose hope. Because you've been praying, you've been waiting, and nothing has happened. And sometimes we don't realize that we have to go to a test, or to say a trial that God is giving us. And that was the trial that the Lord was giving Abraham, because he was already at an age where he was not able to, have children. And so this is something that he accepted and believed anyway. Yeah. And sometimes we have to wait and wait and wait, like he did all these years. He was 100 years old when all this happened. So sometimes you just gotta be patient. And Abraham didn't get mad. He sort of questioned something there, like Lupe was saying, but yet the Lord gave him confidence and say, this is going to happen, and so we have to make sure that we don't lose hope on whatever we pray for unto God, and pray, and it'll take place, in God's time. So that's another thing, that we have to be faithful in that part.
Yep. Does the Lord get angry at us when we question him? Do we feel like the Lord gets angry at us when we question him? I think there's a difference between questioning the Lord and doubting the Lord. When we doubt the Lord, we don't question it. We just say, forget it. It's not going to happen. And in that, the Lord gets angry at us because we just give up. If he told us he was going to do something, and he tells he's going to take care of us, but we seem that life just keeps getting harder and harder. We just forget it, and we doubt the Lord. He's like, all right, he said he was going to, but he's not. As opposed to sometimes we can question the Lord and saying, what am I doing, Lord? Or like, what do I have to do? Like not like in anger and malice, but in pure like, you promised that you would take care of your children. And what do I have to do? Just help me out. There's a difference between questioning the Lord and doubting the Lord. The Lord doesn't get mad when we question Him. It's when we doubt Him, or when we come with some of these off the wall requests and we don't get it and we just say forget it. That's when the Lord is kind of like, all right, what's the point? That he's a little upset. But it's not wrong to sometimes question God as to what we're supposed to do or where we stand in our lives to where it's going to get fixed. And even at this time, Abram, he was a little bit of a complaint, but nevertheless, he didn't do it in malice. He didn't do it in some form of disrespect toward the Lord. He just kind of bringing it up, But like Brother Mario said, he was waiting. The Lord teaching Abram patience at this time before the Lord reassured him, I'm going to take care of you.
I feel like that there's a lot of what we forget as people is that there is a perfect timing. And God has so many things. It's not just this one thing. He's planning on giving them a child, and that has no effect on anything else. I mean, God has got this all figured out all the way around, and it can only happen at this particular time, because then he's going to have a son at this particular time, and he's going to have that wife at this particular time, and that affects this other family at this particular time. Sometimes we forget there's a God's perfect timing, so we think like within our time, what works out best for me, or what's working now. This would be a good time, Lord, if we did it now. If this happened now. If I got married now, if I was having children now, like, why am I not having a child now? This is the perfect time in my life. Yeah. Everything is going good. I got a good job. I'm just like, why are we not having a child now? It's like, it's just so laid out in God's mind, the perfect timing, and it's not our timing.
The Lord sees the bigger picture. The Lord sees the bigger picture, but we as humans, sometimes we can't because we're impatient.
So I've seen in the Bible that there was going to be a time of famine, but not of food, right? It says that there was going to be a famine for the word of God. So I believe in that time where it's prophesied that it was going to be a famine of God's word. It's whenever the loss of prophets, like there's no revelation from God, right, in this time, or maybe rarely ever. Rarely any revelation. But to my understanding, God, especially at the ends of times, prophesied in the book of Joel, said that he's going to send his servants, female and male, with his Holy Spirit out into the world. And the old people are going to, the young or the old will see visions, and dreams, and the others will prophesy, in the name of God. So I believe there's going to come a time when God will start revealing himself and his actions against people. And sadly, many of us will not take caution of those signs or those visions that he will give us. We will ignore them and we won't listen to him. But I strongly believe that there's going to come a time when he is going to send us out in visions to do his instruction when the time comes.
The signs are already here in the sense of where are the signs of the times. But as far as like visions, we have to be very careful with visions. The Lord has already said that he won't deal directly with man anymore. He's already said he won't deal directly with men, which is why he sent his son. Through his son, we have access to the Father, but he has said that he won't deal directly with men. As we read a lot of that in the Old Testament, right? You have a lot of the visions they were given, a lot of the revelations that they were given. But the signs have been here. And like you said, so many times we just ignore them. It's easily ignored because we're too caught up in our own stuff, our own daily life. We're caught up and we don't see the things that are coming to pass that put us in these end times. But They've been there, and through His Word, as we read His Word again, this is the Lord speaking to us. They're revealed to us, right? We can see these things. We can see that things are coming to pass, have come to pass, will come to pass. They're already coming to pass. But we have to be aware. We as children of God have to be aware of, okay, looking around. It says here that this is going to happen: wars, rumors of wars, etc., etc. It's already happening, and we as children of God have to be prepared. We have to be ready.
So you're saying we can't have a vision after Jesus?
Can, but I've always been taught that we have to be weary of that. Sometimes things cloud. We have a dream, or we have certain things that sometimes can cloud our judgment of what's truth, because we're so caught up in this is what it's supposed to be, and then we bring it up. I'm not saying it's not possible to happen, but
so like Paul was after Jesus, and he clearly saw a vision of Jesus spoke to
John was all visions, Revelation.
Spoke to him concerning what he wanted him to do.
Well, again, at that time, though, this is after Christ. This is right after Christ come, the Lord establishing who He was. Years later, because of how polluted things have been, and not just the word being changed, but with how much goes on. Where you've seen the videos of saying people, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, to where nowadays it's just been so diluted to where it could be a dream, or like a legitimate dream, or it could be something that's being revealed to us. But I've always been taught we have to be careful with that, because we have to be very careful with that, because sometimes we're so convicted of what we see in our head, and then we talk about it or we'll bring it up, and it's kind of one of those things where if you bring it to a minister, you bring it to an apostle, regardless, sometimes it's kind of be like, you got to be careful. This is what the word says, as opposed to what's in our head.
I think I understand, because there is in the Old Testament where it says that whoever says, and the Lord said to me, and it's not true. Like if somebody's bringing a message saying that the Lord sent them or said to them, then there's punishment for that.
Yep.
And it was a severe punishment because they were fake.
Yep.
So so it is something to be careful.
There's verses that warn us of a lot of false prophets.
Oh yeah.
In the end, too.
Even in the New Testament, when men would try and come in the name of Jesus, I believe it's in Acts, where they said they came in the name of Paul's God, or Paul's Christ or something. They didn't say they came in theirs. They said they tried to come in the name, because they saw Paul was doing all these miracles and casting out demons, and they said, we come in the name of Paul's spirit, or the spirit that he believes in. And the demons came right on him, and they attacked these people that tried to do that. So we have to be careful with a lot of things that we seem to look into, or we feel like are from, or like things that are being revealed.
Well, one of these things is that I believe Daniel says knowledge will be increased in the latter days. Mm-hmm. And I think that's in scriptures and understanding of prophecy and so on, as much as it is in the technology world today. So that is a way of God revealing himself. And he even talks about the Peter and Paul time, saying even greater things can be known by you. Mm-hmm. So he'll relate things to us that we need to know in our life daily as we go through it.
Yeah, it's reading some of the old prophecies that we all could have like discussions on, and understanding them. That's already a revealing unto us, is it not? Because of back then they didn't understand it. They saw these visions, or they were given these writings, or given these revelations of what to put down, but sometimes they didn't understand it. But they knew things were going to come to pass. And nowadays, because of course, like advancements in technology, but also the Lord allowing us to understand what was at that time, is a revelation in its own, to be able to understand prophecies from the time of Daniel. Even understanding the comparisons of Christ from the stories that we're reading now as to what came later when Christ came himself. It's revealing unto us that sometimes we just kind of take off, or we don't really think about it too much because of, oh, it's just what I was taught in kids class. Oh, that's just what they taught me growing up, or whatever. But it holds a lot more substance than we think. Okay, we'll go on to the last question.
Number 10. When the Lord appeared unto Abram in the plains of Mamre, what was prepared for them? Genesis 18:1-8. And then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by me, your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. So, when the Lord appeared to him, what was prepared for them? It was butter, milk, calf, and they ate the calf.
Yes, ma'am. He took care of them, didn't he? He gave them hospitality when they showed up. And we don't have a question for it. We don't read it, but it's a complete contrast to what Lot did. Because if you read in chapter 19, verses 1-3, it talks about what Lot did when these same angels, it says guests, but they were angels, visited Lot, and how he took care of them, because this was right before Sodom and Gomorrah. This was right before Sodom and Gomorrah was going to happen. What these men were going to tell Abraham now, what was going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah. But Abraham, taking care of them, gave them the best. And it says he rushed. He rushed to meet them, and he bowed himself, because Abraham knew. You got to believe Abraham knew what was in front of him, who was in front of him. Which, again, this is very running parallel to the way that he greeted and treated Melchizedek. If you read a few chapters over, same thing. He took care of them. The same thing. He took care of these people. But this was this is the way Abraham was. The type of man that he was. Told them that he would wash their feet, that they could rest themselves, and as our sister said, he fed them. He took care of them. Complete contrast to the way that Lot did whenever they came to Sodom and Gomorrah and they came into his house. But these were the men that were going to reveal Sodom and Gomorrah was going to be destroyed. And on top of that, verses 9-15, they reassured Abraham of the promise that the Lord was going to give him an heir. They promised that in these verses, their promise that they would give him a son. They would give him a son. So we see, it says Abram in question 10, but at this time his name has been changed to Abraham. But we see
the same thing here, brother, that Jesus did during the Lord's Supper. That's what Abraham did as well. They got the bread, and they were comforted in their hearts. And we also see that he said, make ready a measure of fine milk and cakes at the heart. And then it says, and Abraham ran into the herd and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it unto the young man as he made cake. So we see here almost the same approach of him being humble in their presence, and giving them the best and the respect. And then not only that, but their feet was also washed.
Yeah.
So that was something that caught my eye, and how Abraham humbled himself and invited them the hospitality, the care, and gave them the best of the house for them to be able to eat and enjoy and comfort themselves.
Yeah. He showing the same servitude that the Lord showed to his disciples that evening. Again, Abraham, the humbleness that he had, despite what we read earlier, all that he had, of how wealthy he was, still lowering himself to treat these men as honored guests. Again, a beautiful study to read about Abram and Lot. And these lessons, as we've gone through them last week, the lesson that we had and this lesson, and they seem straightforward, right? Like they just seem like question after question after question, like, oh, okay, this is what happened. Oh, okay, this is what happened. This is what happened. But being able to compare it to, how it relates to our lives, or being able to kind of delve a little bit into the mindset of where they could have been at that time, or like different scenarios that could have, this is why this happened, this is why this happened. You get a lot more from it than just a simple, this is a kid's class story, or this is just one of those things I learned when I was 5 years old and we're just doing a review. There's a lot more as we read into these things to learn from these men, to learn from Abram, to learn even from Lot and the way that he was, and maybe some of the mistakes that he made. But nevertheless, us as children of God should use every story and his word as an opportunity to grow, to get stronger, and to apply it to our lives. If anything, to see from these men, to see from this story, that the Lord is not slack on his promises. And if we have faith in him, we trust in him, he'll take care of us 100%. I think all of us in here can attest to that the Lord is taking care of us even now as we stand here, as we worship. We live in a country to where we can join together to worship him, to spread our truth without there being any type of persecution, without there being any, you get resistance when people don't listen to you, but nevertheless, it's not, there's no consequences from it in the sense of you get punished or, anything like that. So we're more than blessed, brothers and sisters. We just have to stop kind of turning a blind eye to the blessings that the Lord has already given us, expecting that, I should have this, and realize I have everything that I need right here. So, brothers and sisters, thank you for your participation. Thank you for joining us, and those that were on the live, thank you for joining us at the Sabbath School lesson. This is our Sabbath School lesson for this morning, so we're going to take a, 15 minutes? We'll take a 15-minute recess, and we'll join back up whenever our brothers are ready to start the second part of our service. God bless you.